Hi there, I'm Max, and I'll be your guide through this synth safari. Now, on our first journey together, we will take a beginner's look on one of the more common types of synthesizers, the subtractive synthesizer, and we will be using this strange-looking system. Now, if you're a seasoned professional, this video might not be very helpful for you. You probably already know it all. But if you're just starting out, maybe you got your first synth and want to know a little bit more of the inner workings, this video is for you. So by the time we're done, not only will you have a greater understanding of the various components and how they interact, but also you will know why it's called a subtractive synthesizer. So let me just grab my headphones and let's kick it off. Whoops. Seem to be stuck in my wheelchair. So let's do a quick overview of the synthesizer we have in front of us. This one starts out with an LFO, a low frequency oscillator. This is known as a modulation source, and the LFO is used to manipulate other parts of your synth. Next up, we have a noise source, which basically just generates static noise. Next up, at the core of our synthesizer, we have the oscillator, which generates the main sound. So various synthesizers create sound in different ways. So some use samples, some use complex algorithms, but this one is a basic analog oscillator which spews out a few waveforms. Next up comes the mixer. Now the mixer is fairly simple. This is where we mix our different sound sources to one signal and takes it on. And after that, we end up at the filter. Now you noticed I skipped this one because this is just a little oscilloscope so that we can watch the signals later on. So after the mixer comes the filter. Now, the filter lets us filter away certain unwanted frequencies. And we can also emphasize some frequencies if we want to. So that's what the filter does. A very important tool in our arsenal for sound design. Next up, we have an envelope generator. The envelope generator is a little bit like the LFO because this is also a modulation source. This is used to manipulate other parts of the synth. More on that later. And lastly, we have the amplifier, the VCA, the voltage controlled amplifier. That lets us control the sound level of our sound. So let's follow the audio path of the synthesizer. And it all starts with our oscillator. Now, this oscillator provides us with 3 different waveforms. So let's just listen to them and have a look at them real quick. First off, we have a waveform called sawtooth. And when we look at it, I think you can see why it's called sawtooth. Because it basically looks like the edge of a saw. So let's have a listen to it. Well, that sounds kind of low and slow, right? And you'd be right. The oscillator is set to a very slow rate. So if we speed this up, that sounds better. And that also tells us that the speed of the oscillator decides the pitch or the note value that we are playing. Slow speed, lower note. High speed, a higher note. Now let's try the other waveform here, the square wave. Bit more thump in that. Maybe a little harsher, right? And lastly, the one looking like a little rooftop there, like a triangle. The triangle waveform. When it's down low, we barely hear it. But it's a bunch of triangles repeated. So that is our oscillator and its sounds. Let's create a sound then and continue this sound path. So we will take the sawtooth and we will also take the square wave. And we will connect them both to the next step in the signal chain, the mixer. Now the mixer is not a very complex thing, right? We can set the different levels of our signals and we can send them out as one. So let's continue from the mixer to the next step in our audio chain, the filter. Now, of course, there are a lot of different types of filters out there, and this filter looks totally bananas. There are so many options and knobs on it. It looks wild. But the most common type of filter in a subtractive synthesizer is called a low-pass filter. And essentially, if you listen to the word low pass, it does exactly that. It lets the lower frequencies pass, but take away the high ones. So let's listen to what a low-pass filter sounds like. No difference, right? Sounds pretty much the same as when we listen to the oscillator straight up. But now we're gonna change one of the two most important settings on the filter. Let's start with what is called the frequency. This is also referred to as the cutoff frequency or just cut off. And what it does is basically cut off the audio signal at the frequency of your choice. So let's change the frequency. Now our sound got really mellow because we have cut off everything above and let the low frequencies pass through. And when we open the filter completely, everything is sent through. Now the second important feature of the filter is actually connected to this, and it's called the resonance. It's also referred to as the Q or the emphasis, depending on what synthesizer you have. And basically what it is, that when you start cutting here, you select a certain frequency where you cut off the sound. And with the resonance or emphasis, you can choose to emphasize that particular point, that frequency, a little bit to change the character of the filter. Let me illustrate this by doing a filter sweep with and without the resonance turned up. So let's start with the resonance down. Now let's hear how that sounds. So listen carefully and you'll hear a big difference in the character of the sound. Now let's turn up the resonance. Do you hear it sounds fizzy? Turn it up even more. Yeah. We have emphasized that little edge where we cut off the filter. Now listen, if we turn it down, and we're lowering the resonance again. Slight change there, and now it's all smooth again. So the resonance value and the frequency is what we use to control the filter. Now let's head on, because we're not done yet. After the filter stage comes the amplifier. And the amplifier lets us control the audio. So right now, if I connect this up, we don't hear anything. Why is that? Can you tell me? That's true, because we haven't talked about our keyboard yet. And the keyboard, of course, is needed to tell our amplifier when to be on to send the audio through, and when to be off and not make a sound. So let's just stop for a while and talk about the keyboard, because it's a crucial element of the synthesizer. Now, the keyboard of a modern synthesizer sends out a lot of signals. It sends out the on-off switch for when I press the key. It also sends the correct value to the oscillator so it knows which note you're playing. It sends out the actual speed of which you press down the key there, called velocity. How hard are you hitting it? And it also sends out information of if you press an extra time on it. So if I sustain my finger like this on the key, and after a while I choose to press it down even further, then another signal is sent called aftertouch. And then it also keeps track of when I take my finger away from the key, when I release my finger from the actual key. Some synthesizers, like the magnificent Blofeld, also keeps track of how fast I let go of the key. So it's a plethora of signals being sent. But today, you and I will just keep track of two. The note information that makes sure we can play the melody, and the on-off switch so that we can hear the sound and so that the synth stops playing when we remove the finger. So let's hook that up, starting with the melody information, which is a frequency to the oscillator, basically telling it which speed to run at. And then we have the on-off switch. And as you noticed, I sent that on-off switch to the envelope here, the envelope generator. So what does that all mean? Well, now we're gonna get technical. So bear with me. I'm gonna send the on-off switch to the envelope, and the envelope lets me control how I want the volume to behave over time. Right now it's set to be very basic on-off. So let's just connect it up so that we can play our synth. There we go. We should be able to play the synthesizer as intended now. That's a very low signal. We've turned down the filter, so let's open the filter up and send everything through. We have a functioning synthesizer. Now that's cool. We can play our little melodies, and everything is fine and dandy. So, our nemesis here, the envelope generator, is probably the most complex part for a beginner to understand. So, let's soften you up first by heading back to the first module here, the LFO. Because the LFO and the envelope are both modulation sources. They are there to affect other modules of the synth. Now the LFO, low frequency oscillator. Now you hear that word again, oscillator, the same as we have here an oscillator? Well, what's the difference then? Well, basically, only one single difference. This one runs very fast. So fast, in fact, that we hear the sound of it. While this one runs very slow. So slow that we don't hear the sound of it. But we can use those slow signals to manipulate other parts of the synth. So let's try and manipulate the note value of the oscillator. So if I take a little triangle here, little triangle symbol here, and we listen, before I connect it, we listen to the key here. Yeah, it's a clean signal. Now if I put it in here and let it manipulate the frequency, let's hear it. All of a sudden it turned into an American police car from some 80s movie. Sounds pretty weird. And if I increase the speed of our LFO, now it really sounds like a police car. Of course, if we want it to sound like anything else but an American police car, we can actually turn it into a French police car from the 80s as well, just by changing the actual wave shape. Because if we turn this and use another signal, the square wave, which is basically going up and down and up and down, you have a police car from France in 1986 or something. This sounds ridiculous, so we can let a little less in of that fluctuating signal. Let's just lower the value a little. There. This we can't do much with, but if we increase it even more, now it almost starts sounding like a Nintendo, right? Now that's pretty cool. So, of course, the LFO can be sent to wherever we want to. It can control the filter, it can also control the volume, and you can do all kinds of things with the LFO. So it's a powerful feature, and most synthesizers have more than one. So now let's head on to the difficult part here. The envelope generator. Now, most people have a hard time understanding it and getting their head around what it actually is, but I usually say it's very simple, because what it is a level controller with a few timing settings. So we use it to control the level. The level of what? Well, whatever we send it to. If we send it to the oscillator, it might be the level of the pitch value. If we send it to the filter, it might be the level of the frequency of the filter. Or, like we're gonna do, send it to the volume controller, then it's the level of the volume we control. So let's break it down. The envelope generator is a level controller divided in 4 segments called attack, decay, sustain, and release. So what happens when the keyboard sends out the on signal is that the envelope shoots up the volume to maximum. It always does that. So the first segment here always sends the level to maximum. And the first segment value here, the attack, lets us control how long time it's going to take before it reaches that top level. Right now, we have the attack set to 0, and that means it takes no time whatsoever. When I press a key, the sound is there instantly. But if I add a little time here with our timer control for attack, let's see what happens now. It slowly fades in. And we can look at this signal as well. Give me a moment. Now our envelope is sent to our little screen here so we can watch the signal. And I added a takt time just now. So if we look at the signal now, we see that it fades slowly upwards. And when I let go, it just shuts off. So slowly up. And when I let go of the key, it just drops down. So the attack is a timer value. How long do you want it to take before we reach the full volume? Now the next stage is called decay. And it starts as soon as the first stage reaches its maximum level. It goes to the top and then the sound starts decaying, or the volume I should say. So, and this is just keeps decaying until it reaches the sustain stage. And the sustain stage is the level kept as long as I keep my finger sustained on the key. So in some ways, the decay and the sustain stage are connected. If I lower my sustain to halfway here, I will only get half the level. You hear it drop down to half. And if we look at the signal now, we will see it slowly goes up, but then it drops like a stair step straight down, and then it lays there in a right line until I remove the finger and it drops even further. Attack stage goes to maximum volume, then the decay starts, and it's gonna fall and drop all the way down to the sustain stage, always. And the time it takes for it to drop is what you control with the decay. So it's also a timer control. Let's take one last look at the signal here. It fades out and does an abrupt drop, and then it stays at the sustain level. And when I let go, it's all quiet. So if I add a little decay time here with this setting, now let's see how it looks and sounds. You see, now it slowly decays down to the sustain level smoothly. And when I let go, it just cuts off. And that's kind of nice. Fades in, slowly fades down, and then it cuts off. So as long as I press the key here, the envelope just stops at the sustain stage. It just runs through this, and stands still at the sustain stage for as long as I keep my finger on the key. It's gonna stay there forever. So when I release my finger from the key, the last step kicks in. And this is also a timer setting. It decides how long it's gonna take before the sound just goes completely quiet. So right now it's 0 time, so it cuts straight off. But if I add a little time to it, like so, now when I release my finger, the sound is gonna slowly fade down to nothing. Stays there on the sustain, and now I'm gonna release it. Now we also see a slow little curve down to 0. So that's the 4 stages of the envelope generator: attack, decay, sustain, and release. And attack and decay, of course, are time values. Sustain is the actual level we want when we keep the finger sustained on the keyboard. And the release is what happens after we release. And it's also a time control. So time, time, level, time. But then what happens if I have no sustain at all? If I just remove the sustain? Now what's going to happen? Now it's going to go up, and the decay is going to keep going down until it reaches sustain, which in this case is nothing. So let's hear that. That's the end of the sound. And when I release, there is no volume to fade out because it's already gone, so the release has no effect. It just fades out. Say I want a sound that sounds sort of like when I hit a string on a guitar. You know, an instant sound, but then it fades out immediately. Well, if I remove the attack time, because we want an instant attack, right? If that is a 0, it's going to shoot out to maximum volume, and then it's going to decay down pretty fast here to nothing at all. And we can also just remove the whole release as well, because it's not going to be used. How does this sound? Yeah. It slowly fades out. And if I fade it out faster here with the decay, an even shorter decay time, I can get something like that. So the envelope is a very important tool to change the behavior of your sound over time. And now we have only used it to manipulate the volume, right? So what happens if we send this exact same signal to the filter as well, controlling the filter frequency over time? Right now, it shoots straight up to maximum level in no time and then slowly fades down. So what if I take my filter here? So let's introduce the envelope to the filter. Right now, the filter sends everything through, so there should not be any real difference in sound. No, there is not. But if I lower the filter here, the filter frequency, the cut off, so that it begins very low, shoots up, and then goes down low again. Let's see. Whoa. Completely different character of the sound. And what if I add a little resonance to it? A lot. See? Just gonna go a bit lower here so we get somewhat of a bass tone. So that's how you can manipulate the filter with the envelope. Now, usually synthesizers have 2 of these envelopes, one specifically for the filter and one specifically for the volume. So you can do separate things. Right now I only have one, but it sends out 2 signals. Compare that to this. So yeah, quite a difference in sound. And I think this is a good time to just stop, because we've been doing so much in this video, and I hope your brain hasn't overflowed, and I really hope I didn't confuse you too much with the whole envelope discussion. It's basically just a level controller with a timer on it, and you can send it to wherever you want. So I hope this was a helpful video for you. Please let me know in the comments what you thought about it and what you want to see next. I'm gonna go very slow in my videos and try to keep things less technical than other channels, I hope. But yeah, that's about it. I'm Max. This is Synth Safari. See you next time. Bye.